Uh, Hello, and welcome to this webinar of the value of Copilot for Microsoft 365. My name is Joseph Lynn, and I'd like to introduce Anna Donnelly. We both work on Insight's portfolio team, and we've been driving Copilot for the past 6 months. But in today's conversation, we really wanted to focus on what is the ROI, the gap of the ROI. Customers are asking for ROI because, let's be honest, Copilot for Microsoft 365 is not cheap, $30 per user per month. And many C-level resources are interested in the product, interested in the capabilities, but then when the price point comes forward at that total bottom line, they question what is the value to the organization. So in this conversation, we're going to go into the gap, ROI expectations, how Copilot for Microsoft 365 fits into the overall picture, use cases, because that's really important because the use case does drive value within an organization. And then ultimately, how do we talk about the value of it throughout an organization for the Copilot for Microsoft 365? Where do I find ROI for Copilot and Microsoft? And this is the biggest question we get asked. Let's be honest. Copilot, Anna, came out in November of 2023, Copilot for Microsoft 365, and it was common, not as much of an ask initially because it's more about feature sets. But now the real question is the ROI for Microsoft 365. Mm-hmm. This is a tough one. Anna and I go back and forth all the time around ROI capabilities. And I think for my purpose, I'm just laying it out there, the ROI you're going to see definitely drives around employee experience and more about, if not efficiencies, but not as much productivity gains. And we'll go into as why.
Yeah. And again, that absolutely is the number one question that we get, especially for organizations that are like, why should I invest more? And this is an issue that exists, beyond just the conversations that we're having. I mean, so Microsoft has these AI work trends. They have a site that's dedicated to their work trend index. And the latest study that they put out, 3,000 people, over 60 companies. The conclusion here is relatively nebulous, right? Copilot users are reading fewer emails. They're spending less time interacting with them. Some saw meeting increases, some saw decreases. I believe the last one, which is that Copilot users edited 10% more documents in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. I feel as though folks are using it more using the collaborative editing features and saving things to the cloud and things that are really kind of best practices for these productivity apps. I think they're probably doing that a little bit more, but this doesn't really translate into, tangible return on investment. Everybody's looking for that hard ROI. And part of the problem is that, regardless, target is knowledge workers. How are we measuring the productivity of knowledge workers anyway, right? And then there's even if you are measuring something, right, we're spending less time reading email. The question is, what are you doing with that time, right? We have all kinds of fun stories and anecdotes on on how people are spending their time. One where somebody saved a bunch of time and then decided to just go rock climbing or something, something like that, right? So increases in productivity, it's not only what is happening more efficiently, but how is that knowledge worker then using their time, which is really tends to be very, very difficult and complex if you are going to measure that. Did you want to add anything here before we kind of go into where we can find measurable ROI?
I think you're right. I definitely agree. Being more productive, being more efficient is absolutely very hard to measure. Like, how many times have we seen third-party articles out there about, hey, if an employee has 2 monitors, they could be 33 more efficient and productive having multiple monitors, multiple screens, and being able to have multiple windows open at the same time, right? That's great, and I think there's some value to that statement. But again, it's always, how do you prove it? There's going to be some users out there that absolutely will get more done with this tool, with a tool like this or this tool. There's absolutely going to be some users out there that are going to spoil it for people, right? And they're just going to take that time to maybe go take a break. So I mean, it's definitely hard to measure across the company because it's not going to be consistent.
Yeah, there's no silver bullet here, but
no.
That said, there is some value.
There is. And if I look at some of the measurable ROI that we talk with customers about and what we found within our own organization, one of the big ones up first is going to be just upskilling. Like, and I talk about this all the time. Just think about something like Excel. You can write queries. You can write, I mean, pivot tables, charts. You can do all these great things in Excel. I'm not very good at Excel. I'll be honest with you. I actually prefer Power BI over Excel. But even then, like, I use Copilot to help me figure out how to create those queries, how to create the formulas. So I'm upskilling myself by simply leveraging Copilot to help me get better. But again, if you think of enhanced search capabilities, Anna and I tell customers all the time, first thing I go to if I have to search within my own organization or even on the web now is Copilot for Microsoft 365. We use the M365 chat. It's very granular in how it responds. It gives you explanations. It gives you links to what it's looking for. And then just improving existing measurable processes. It's just, in that sense, from an ROI perspective, how are we doing things today versus how can we do it tomorrow even better? But a couple of things I want to keep in mind here when we talk about this for Microsoft 365, it's new. It's still young. It's not a technology that's been out forever. Early access previews went and started at about end of August, beginning of September last year. They went live November 1st of last year. And that was only to companies who were willing to purchase 300 licenses. And then in January, it opened up to everybody where you could buy single licenses. And then if you look at functionality for Microsoft 365, it's rolling out all the time. Like we live this technology. I mean, Anna probably more than me at this point. But I mean, we're literally talking to customers daily, talking to the Microsoft teams daily. We're in the product daily. We have to stay above and beyond where it's going so we can provide the value to customers so they understand where the value is overall from a product standpoint. It's difficult for us just laying it out there. And that's our sole job is to do this. So given understanding, we're leveraging Copilot to help us keep up with its own capabilities and feature sets within the tool. And then lastly, it's like the generative AI is becoming that expectation. Like we're now hearing from companies, it's the means of just doing business, right? They're getting an understanding of why. First, we went into the subject of, is there true ROI from a productivity standpoint, efficiencies, to now there's customers starting to shift their feedback on, it's just a means of doing business. Anna has a great, I don't know if you want to talk about it, but the comment about email. Tell everybody about your email comment, because I think it fits perfectly into this technology at the same time.
Yeah. So back in the day, because I like talking about how things used to be. If you had an email address, it was like a pretty big deal, right? That was a privilege. I compare that today. So in our own organization, for folks who have Copilot, they actually have to prove that they're using it. So we look at the usage metrics and we say, okay, you're not using it. If you don't get that usage up in the next 30 days, we're going to give it to somebody who will. And that's kind of how it used to be back in the mid 90s or so, the mid to late 90s. If you got your email address, there was usually a purpose, right? I am going to use it because I need to do this. There weren't necessarily questions about what's the return on investments, right? There was an assumption that you were going to be able to communicate more efficiently. But how much folks were actually talking about the specifics for ROI, and I think part of the reason for that, though, is that I feel like folks were a lot less informed about technology than they are today. Right. So your average, CEO wasn't asking about ROI of this stuff. It was just something that, the nerds were asking for. It eventually kind of snowballed to become this thing that was an expectation because it is a way to operate efficiently in your business. And I feel as though we're kind of in that very beginning stage there where, right now, people are kind of having to rationalize and justify why they need it and if they're going to use it or whatever, right? But I think down the road, these are attached to productivity tools. This is just going to be what it is. And again, it's really where the real value is. I mean, Joe, you talk about our own internal experience and the feedback that we've gotten about Copilot for Microsoft 365. It pretty much mirrors the responses that you see here that are also from the Work Trend Index.
It does. And so we have a 5,300 users licensed, and Insight is about 89 to 90% adopted, which is really great numbers. And we're proud of that. But we did survey everybody. And I was skeptical at first. I'll be the first one to say it. because I love Copilot for Microsoft 365. I think that it's improved over time, and I've gotten more value out of it over time. But I've always been curious about the business because I look at it differently. I'm looking at it to break it to what doesn't work, so I can be of more valuable to customers to truth, right? What is the truth behind the product? And honestly, the feedback we saw from the surveys is our product managers, our delivery resources, our salespeople, marketing, everybody's feedback was like beyond positive. Like how much time it saved them, and more importantly, when it saved them time, it wasn't always about doing more work, honestly. It was about, hey, I can get my work done in a timely manner, right? I'm not working 10 hours a day. I may not only be working 9 hours a day, or I can spend more time listening to a customer versus just trying to write everything down. I can respond to customers quicker. So it's that customer interaction, that experience, not only employee experience internally, but also experience from a customer perspective. That was the bulk of the feedback. It wasn't about I can do more. It's I had more time to think. I had more time to concentrate or focus on the activity that I'm supposed to be doing because Copilot gave them a few extra minutes here and there throughout the day. So I found that very interesting. But also, Anna, to go back to what you're saying about email, as you're saying that, I was also thinking back, just thinking the 80s, right? 80s to 90s. Like we started out with beepers and same thing, right? Like everyone who you had to do business, everyone had a beeper number on their credit, on their
There's a
business
pager.
cards.
There's a
Yeah,
pager for those
pager.
of you who don't know what that is. And
Oh, sorry. Yeah, pager,
I feel like
beeper.
there's even people who don't know what a pager is.
Yeah, but
So,
then we go into the late 90s, right? Cell phones. Cell phones weren't for
yeah.
everybody. They were for like the most important people because they weren't cheap. And now, right, everybody has a cell phone. There's businesses that only have cell phones. They don't even have a regular corporate desk phone anymore. So it's pretty interesting to see how some technologies were so core. Like they started just like this did, but now they're actually core to how we do
Yeah.
business, right? You
Yeah.
could not do business with without these technologies today. And this is a type of tool that is absolutely going to be that going forward because as it improves, it's only going to get better. I mean, we're what 7 months in, 8 months tops in, and it's already a night and day different product than what was released in November. And I think by November coming, I think that the amount of feature sets that's going to be rolled out and capabilities is going to be through the roof.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely agree with that. Okay. So here's another question we get a lot, and I love this one because the answer for me is kind of fun. um, because it's always I feel as though sometimes I disappoint people when I say it doesn't vary from industry to industry. I mean, certainly there are specifics, right? But that the specifics of what you're doing, but it's kind of like saying, what is the use case for Microsoft Word, or what is the use case for Excel? We're all kind of using those things in the same way, right? We're using them for financial transactions. We're using them to crunch numbers and data, or we're using it to draft, content. The work might be different, right? It might be the difference between creating a research paper or a white paper versus a proposal or a statement of work. But ultimately, it's all kind of very similar as far as what the use cases are. And I think part of the issue is that there is this confusion or a little bit of conflation between the use cases for Copilot for Microsoft 365 versus just generative AI use cases. So this also kind of goes back to the ROI conversation because people are looking at use cases and to the general generative AI use cases that do drive productivity, right? That can apply to specific processes and get very granular in what it can do. They're kind of thinking of that in the same way that Copilot for Microsoft 365, is addressing productivity, and they're not the same, not at all. At least this is again my opinion on this kind of thing. I mean, you can talk about a generative AI use case and say, look at all of this marketing content strictly. You can train it, right? To say only look at these documents and here's our brand voice and very specific on what you want it to return from a marketing perspective. So if you have this generative AI bot, you are training it very specifically on the type of tone and the content that it has, and it will provide you with something very precise. And ultimately you can say, I can get this much closer to the finished product and save, this much time. Whereas with Copilot for Microsoft 365, it's looking at the whole of all of your data. And you're never going to be able to get that kind of very precise response out of it, right? It still is going to have to be an iterative process. It will help you along, but it is not for, really specific use cases in its current status. At least again, this is my opinion, Joe. I don't know if you've got more to add to that.
No, I mean, the last part, I think you absolutely nailed it. I mean, if I look at even one use case is just generating graphics and design, right? Copilot Microsoft 365 will work, right? It's hit or miss on what graphics you're going to get, but with the just typical open Azure AI, like you can pick which LLMs you want with AI Studio. So it can be very specific to just graphics. So you can get very granular, right, on your use case. But one thing I think you have to keep in mind is it's a separate user experience, right? Because it's not going to be in the same UI UX of the Office products. You're going to have to create a face for it so the end users can use it. But again, like you said, you can get way more granular, way more deep, way more closer to being an expert of that data and providing expert responses.
Yeah. And again, it's just the point here is not to confuse the two. So are there going to be things that are specific to an industry? Probably, but is it going to be one of the general use cases that everyone is using it for on its, really at face value? I feel like yes. Where it is a little bit different is when we start looking at personas. Microsoft's got a lot of content out in the Copilot lab that is specific to your persona, right? So are you in HR? Are you in finance? But I mean, I feel like ultimately, again, prompts, use cases really kind of are all going to fall into one of these categories, right? Editing text, transforming documents, take this document and create a presentation, summarize information. So whether that's email or Teams, create engaging content, any kind of content generation that takes place across all of these apps, right? So whether that's being a little bit more creative or coming up with some kind of brainstorming content in Whiteboard, all the way to generating, documents in Word, catching up on missed items. So pretty much everything will fall into at least one of the categories here for, what those use cases are. And then, you can get a little bit more specific. So this again is another one that comes from Microsoft, right? For an executive, they can prepare for a company-wide address, but guess what? Preparing for a company-wide address, pretty much summarizing information, transforming a document, learn about things. It's the same thing. Simplify the onboarding process, right? It all is going to fall into the same thing. I feel like so much of that sits in this learn space here. You talked about the value of upskilling. And I feel like if you are a new employee, being able to find answers about what goes on in an organization using Copilot. In fact, on Friday, I was talking to a brand new employee who had access to Copilot here at Insight about that and about how they could use, Copilot to kind of help them find information, and that it completely blew their minds that was something that they could do, right? So again, vaguely, if you're in all of these roles, that it does look different. This is meant to give you some ideas on how you can use it. And this is not to say that we're never going to be able to find specific use cases for industry or return on investment, but this is where we're at, currently. Is there anything you want to add here before we talk about the functional maturity, our favorite slide?
No, you nailed this.
Okay. And so beyond that, functional maturity and use cases, this is by the way, disclaimer, this is the world according to Joe and I. So this is not, this is not any kind of scientific study. This is just kind of our opinion on where use cases are at versus the functionality and the maturity of the product. And, we've seen many of these things go to the right. So, it's there's a lot of use cases for some of these things, but maybe it's not quite there with the functionality yet. It's just really something that you need to kind of work with and keep working with and keep trying, right? There are things that there's something in PowerPoint I try at least once a week just to see whether or not it's there yet. And that's updating the fonts in a deck, in a PowerPoint deck. And it's not quite there yet, but there's a article from an executive at Microsoft who talks about doing that. So we know it's coming, right? We know it's on its way, just not yet. Is there anything else you want to add here?
No, I think from a use case, like we were mentioning earlier around some of the ROI of search capabilities, like you see in the top right of this slide is the M365 chat. And that M365 chat is across whether it's the Windows 11 Copilot app, it could be the Bing, the Edge browser Copilot app, or it could be the M365 chat in Teams. Like that by far, I mean, just my own use case, I use it every day. I use it to research just public information. Maybe if I'm going to talk to a customer, I'll ask questions for what's available on the web specific to the customer or the person I'm speaking to. If I have to look up, like you mentioned, Anna, around training, we have a service, an insight called Manage Endpoint. And I love asking about our services, right? And just generating a conversation that would be customer facing. Like, would you approach a customer regarding whether it's a specific service, a specific technology, just to see how it responds and how it would tweak what I would typically say most times. And so, again, I think that application was crazy useful with it for everybody in an organization. And I think the rest, like you said, Anna, they're maturing as time goes on, and the use cases are definitely increasing.
Yep. And the Microsoft 365 chat, just for the record, because I feel like this is something that comes up pretty frequently, is the only place where the data is grounded in your data, right? The responses are grounded in your data. So that is where you're going to get answers to questions about content in Microsoft 365 today. Eventually, we'll be able to get it elsewhere. It's all on the roadmap, but right now, again, that's the one I agree with you. That's at least from my opinion is super useful. All right, so where does this leave us as our customers are talking about the value? Because I feel like, again, that's the thing that comes to us is like, hey, I'm trying to talk to my CEO or CIO or CFO. I'm trying to get more money for more of this because I know my end users like it. But how do I talk about this so that we can understand what the value is and how we should apply it internally?
Yeah, so one of the things I want to point out here, again, we talked about prior to doing this recording, like the two of the major stats we see here, right? Is 79% of all leaders agree the company needs AI to stay competitive. And we're hearing that just from the comment I said earlier around companies about it's needed just to do business. Yeah. But the bottom one that I found interesting is 78% of users are using their own AI tools. So for anybody who's watching this, understand this. If you haven't rolled out an AI tool today, your end users are using it. Whether they're using tools on their Android phone, their Apple phone, whether they're going to things like a ChatGPT, like they're absolutely using it in some form or fashion. I mean, let's be honest, even the social media apps, if I look at things like Snapchat, Instagram, they all have AI search engines built into that. So think about what employees are typing. And my thing here would be adopt like a Microsoft 365 for Copilot and start driving centrally where your users are using, especially for your corporate data. Because we talked about ROI earlier, and I think there's ROI from an upskilling. We talked about searching and those capabilities. But think about an ROI from security side. Like 78% of users are bring your own AI tools that they're using. And now that's your corporate data potentially touching those third-party or public AI tools where what they type in ends up going back into the large language model for training purposes. So being able to adopt this type of solution not only helps drive your users to be a more standard approach of how they do things, it's grounded on your data, it's secured within your environment. So it's not only increasing security posture, but it's decreasing your security risk of your data getting out there in the public. So again, make sure you understand that this is grounded in your data. We always try to say that to every customer to understand is Copilot for Microsoft 365, it's tied to your tenant, right? All the security tools you have in your tenant, it utilizes it. So we love talking about the security ecosystem of the Microsoft Cloud. So what you set in one place kind of goes across everything. Same thing here, right? It's tied to the user, the context of the user. So understand that the more you adopt it, the more you drive it, the more value your company is going to gain because they're going to get better and better at it as the tools get more mature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the means for measuring what's going on in the background is only getting better. I know we're getting like some kind of an AI dashboard in Purview. So things like that I think will help folks understand how these things are being used, and to understand, where those complex use cases that will actually drive return on investment down the road, where those things are at. I think that the value of getting to this now, finding your early adopters and figuring out what it means to your organization, I think that is something that shouldn't be, um, missed as part of this as well. Is that you can build your own solutions, right? They're very costly. So if you are building something in Azure AI and you're grounding things in your data, if you're training it with your data, all of that, there's a lot of effort that goes into it. And we didn't even get into this Copilot Studio conversation, which is changing that, right? We have another webinar about that if you're interested about Copilot Studio, but it's changing that conversation a little bit. But as it is right now, those are very expensive solutions, and expensive solutions when you don't know necessarily what the outcome is going to be, and if that is the thing you're going to use to familiarize your end users with. There's some risk to that versus using a tool like Copilot for Microsoft 365, where the outcome is known, right? We know that people are generally more productive and like using it. So I think, there's kind of have to think about it less in the way of how much money am I going to get back out of this, versus, what is the future of work?
And think about, I mean, well said, Ann. And if I we'll go back to your email example. When email first came out, right? Share mailboxes wasn't a thing. Distribution groups weren't a thing, right? And so it's, as people use it, these ideas are coming out as far as how do we improve it? How do we make it better? And it's the same for your organization. The more you help your users use this, they're going to come up with better ideas, not only how to use Copilot for Microsoft 365 better, right, across your organization, but there's going to be use cases specific to your business that are potentially going to drive even the OpenAI and the Azure side at the same time, because there's absolutely a need for both depending on the use cases required. But your users aren't going to understand what's the art of the possible unless they try to use it, unless they try things, and unless they start thinking about things and talking to other users. So think about that. I mean, no different than email and these other technologies. The more we use it, the more features come out because of what people are saying, because of feedback. And it's the exact same when we talk about Copilot for Microsoft 365.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, just to put a nice bow on that, so the Work Trend Index article where we got all this information, it's AI at Work is here. Now comes the hard part. That's the article. There is an entire section on power users and how they are going to drive innovation in your business, and they're really driving an understanding of AI. I absolutely would recommend everybody take a look at that, because it is this is the time when we're learning about all of these things. Great. All right. Any closing statements here? Otherwise, we can let everybody go.
No, I think let's just summarize, right? I mean, the ROI here, we definitely are pushing towards that. It's employee experience, it's upskilling, it's maybe better searches. Use case wise, there's going to be use cases specific to every organization, but when it comes to Copilot for Microsoft 365, keep in mind the use cases are still grounded towards the Office apps. So it's writing a Word document, it's generating maybe content in Excel, generating a PowerPoint, summarizing an email. So as much as the use cases are different, people will use it differently, but they're generally going to be similar underlying the tool sets that are used. And there's absolutely going to be use cases specific to the complex side, right? The bet side where Azure OpenAI is going to want to be more an expert and do more specific things. So understanding there's value on both sides of the house here, and just got to understand where that value lies.
Yep, absolutely. Great. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We appreciate your time, and certainly if you want to scan the QR code here, you can meet up with us. We love talking about this more. We always have more to say, Joe and I. So we appreciate everybody's time. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.